not being too afraid to mess up. I mean, that's I guess is what it comes down to. Like, knowing that the people around you are not waiting for you to screw up. They're just there to help, and they are on your team and on your side. And it's not like that nightmare where you're taking a test and don't know any of the answers. It's like you have the people around you and they have the answers, and it's okay to ask them, and it's okay to tell them what you need and let them use their expertise to help you get there.
I'm here today with Dan Erickson, who is a TV writer and producer, the creator of Severance for Apple TV, and in September 2022, you were named to the Time 100 Next list, which features 100 emerging leaders from around the world who are shaping the future and defining the next generation of leadership. The reason I bring that up, we're going to have a lot of conversations about leadership, show running, whether it's the story and theme of the show, the story and theme of your life, work-life balance, so many different things that we're going to talk about today. But first of all, cannot express my gratitude enough for the fact that you are finally here recording this. I know for you, it's, well, this was on my calendar today. This has been on my calendar for months in my head. So glad to finally make it a reality. This means a lot to me. Thank you.
No, I'm so happy too. And it's been, it's probably a bit indicative of how the process has been of making our second season. It's been, extraordinarily busy, and we've been working really hard. But yeah, I was finally able to get a little bit of a break where I was like, okay, this is actually feasible now. And I'd been wanting to come on and talk with you for a long time. So it worked out. There was finally just a little parting of the clouds, and we were able to do it.
Well, I appreciate it because it would be just as easier for you to say, hey, this sounds like a great opportunity. Either not interested and I don't have the time, but you've been willing to endure the emails and the calendar links and all the other things to get here. So I'm very, very grateful for that. And for anybody, first of all, that's coming to this interview, they're like, ooh, what's Severance? For the love of God, hit the pause button, stop this interview, go on Apple TV and watch the first season of the show. I have written this in print and it will now be in audio forever. And I stand by this statement. I'm literally gonna die on this hill. If this show continues to be as consistently good as it is in its first season, you are going to be in the same conversation as Breaking Bad. I completely and totally believe that. No pressure, but I completely and totally believe that. That's how good the first season of your show was.
I mean, that's insanely high praise. So I really appreciate you saying that. It's yeah, it's funny. I think we knew when we were making it that there was something special here, but the fact that it has connected with people on the level it has, and I've said this before, but I always assumed this show was going to be like 5 people's favorite show, somewhere in the world, and it's like the show that your most obnoxious friend won't shut up about. I'm like, I would love to be in that category, but the fact that it's like actually become something that people are talking about, on a wide level, and to even be mentioned in the company of Breaking Bad is pretty incredible. So yeah, it's a trip. It's been a real trip.
Yeah, and I want to get into a little bit later in the show some of my theories about why it hit the way that it did, based on the themes. This idea of work-life balance is clearly why I gravitated to it, or the extreme lack thereof. And I think that had you made the show 10 years ago, I think it would have been 5 people's favorite shows, but because the theme hit at exactly the right time, right during or the tail end of the pandemic, just the sense of blurring of work-life balance completely disappeared. I think thematically, that's one of the reasons that it hit. But before we get down that road, because we're definitely going to get there, this first part is seriously just for my own personal gratification, and I think a lot of people are going to get a kick out of it. But I remember watching the first few episodes and just staring at the screen, and I was like, man, I wish I could have been in the room when they were pitching this. So here's my vision for the pitch, and then I want you to share the reality.
Right.
Here's my vision of the pitch. All right, so you're in there, you're with the studio executives. So you guys have heard of The Office, right? Oh yeah, we love The Office, one of our favorite shows. Okay, so just imagine that it's this kind of office workplace comedy drama, but now it's set in the world of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Oh, okay, that's really interesting, but it's like, tonally, it's still a comedy. No. Now imagine that you add The Shining. Okay, you're kind of losing us. Okay, hold on a second. Hold on. So the star of the show is going to be the guy from Parks and Rec. Holy cow, you got Chris Pratt? No. We got Adam Scott. Okay, so talk to us about the vision. Okay, so here's the best part. I brought somebody on board. Director, producer, EP, going to be a major part of this. It's the guy that played Derek Zoolander. Oh, wait. One more thing. I know you're really concerned about all of this. The other director that we're going to bring in, because, I mean, come on, Zoolander can't direct all the episodes. We're going to bring another director that barely has any TV experience whatsoever, but has done some shorts and music videos. That's my vision for your pitch, because you look at everything on paper and you think, how did this ever come into existence? I, for months, have wanted to know what's the real story and the real pitch that got you where you are today.
I mean, that's you got it word for word. That was exactly what I came in with, and that's amazing. Yeah, no, I mean, of course, the real version of that pitch you just gave happened over the course of about 2 years, as these different elements fell into place. But it was, it's funny. I will say, like, going back to when I was taking it around town, because it ended up on Ben Stiller's desk after being put on this publication called The Blood List, which is like a version of the Blacklist that's just for horror and sci-fi scripts. And but before that, I had just been taking it around, and it was I don't think I used Kubrick. I used Terry Gilliam mostly as the sort of the model for that. Like, I would usually start at Brazil and then go from there. And that was partially because, like, the version of it that I had then, and I think you can actually find the script online. I don't know if it's supposed to be there, but
I'm glad you brought that up, because I actually discovered it today, and we're going to talk more about the version that was dated December 13th of 2014. But I'm going to stick a pin in that for a second.
Awesome. Well, yeah. All that is to say that the original version was a little bit more Terry Gilliam and a little less, 2001 and Ben, over the course of it, really grounded it more. I think that the original version I had was a lot, it was more heightened, dare I say, sillier. And so, yeah, I mean, and then I will say the one part of your pitch that I would have to call inaccurate was anybody objecting on any level to Ben's involvement or even questioning, because by the time we were doing it, he had already done Escape at Dannemora. And so it was like everybody we talked to was like, oh, it's like they had already had the Zoolander can direct a drama really well revelation. So I didn't have to go through that, although I'm sure Ben did earlier on.
Yeah, and that's a whole other journey that I'm just fascinated by, because I would imagine that at some point Ben had people saying, well, we know who you are clearly and you're very successful, but directing and producing a drama, like at any level, that's a barrier that somebody has to overcome, which is, well, I believe I can do it, but I haven't proven that I can do it. Ben Stiller or otherwise, that's hard for anybody to overcome that, which I would guess is another part of your journey that I definitely want to get into as well. But the heart of all of this for me, where I want to start, is the kernel of the idea. And the reason that I bring this up, and the thing that's really important for me as a theme of today's conversation, is sticking with your vision, because you had an idea, you had a kernel, you had a vision, years and years of trying to get it made. And I know that it wasn't a very easy road, and it didn't just come all naturally for you to become a quote unquote overnight success. What was the kernel of this? Where did it begin?
Well, it began at the first job that I had when I first moved to Los Angeles, which I have sort of colloquially called the Door Factory when I've talked about it in the past. But it wasn't really a door factory. It was a company that they make and they ship and they repair doors and gates throughout the greater Los Angeles area. And it was I was coming from grad school. I had just like so much negative money and couldn't afford a car. So I took the bus out to this interview, and it was the first Craigslist interview I could find. And it was a horrible, horrible, horrible job. I mean, I still appreciate them for giving it to me at the time. And you know, the people for the most part were very nice, but it was like I was in this like little windowless office that felt like it was out of like being John Malkovich or something. And it was just this, you know, horrible fluorescent, like they never fixed the blinking light above me. And there would be like, you know, there was one window out onto the production floor and I would see like door parts moving by. And it was just, I was just, it was eating my soul little by little. And it was one day that I walked in and I just like caught myself having like what felt like a very casual thought, which is like, what if there was a way to just like turn off the next 8 hours? Like, so I'm doing it, I'm there and I'm doing the work, but I don't have to consciously, it would feel like just jumping ahead and I could be like, and then literally it was like within about 10 seconds of having that thought, the show was mostly formed, like in terms of at least the concept, where it was like, because it was one thing led to naturally to another thing, which is like, well, yeah, but then what about that version of me? Like, does his mind reset every day? And I was like, no, because he would need to remember the stuff he had learned at work. So it would have to be like a totally just separate version of me that lives there all the time and retains memories there. And then it was like, oh my God, but that guy would be in hell. Like that would be a nightmare. And so it really was like, you know, and that morning I got yelled at by my boss because I was being a terrible employee. I was like sitting there just like furiously writing down notes about this idea, you know, well, there were hinges to be cataloged. And so it really was just kind of born out of an actual, you know, moment of corporate misery where I was just like, I would rather not experience the next 8 hours of my life, which is the other side of it that I wanted to interrogate, was like, that's a pretty messed up thing to catch yourself wishing for. Like, I wish I had less of my day, you know, when we have, you know, limited time here on earth and you're literally wishing for less of it, like there's something wrong. So all of those it was like, again, within about half an hour of the idea, it was like all these themes were there. And I was just like, this is as a writer, you sort of hope that you'll, you know, happen to stumble upon an idea like that, where you're like, wait, this is simple-ish, but it makes sense. And it's something that feels like, it's like, has anyone done this before? And I looked into it and no one had, so it worked out.
From that point, I think there are so many writers, people that do creative work, whether it's artists, painters, musicians, so many people have kernels of ideas. They have entire journals of ideas. I could do this. I could write that. I could make this. They sit in a journal and they never get made. So from the point that you had this kernel of an idea and you're pouring it all out onto the page, and I love this vision of you should be cataloging hinges. I'm already seeing the parallels between your real life and the show, which we're going to talk about, have not ended from that point. But from kernel of idea to I'm actually going to follow through with this and I'm going to write it and I'm going to get it out into the world. Mm-hmm. How do we fill that giant gap? Because so many people have ideas, very few have Emmy nominated shows from Apple.
Right. It was, I mean, in terms of like actually writing it, that was something that I had gotten better at just through practice, because I was, I mean, like I said, I went to grad school for 2 years before this, and had sort of, you know, because I when I was younger, I would hit a lot of the struggles that a lot of people do, which is, yeah, like you start something. I was really good at getting to like page 30. And because I loved setup. I was like, okay, we're setting up the world. It's cool. But then it's like, you hit a point where you're like, well, what next? And, you know, the executive function in the head starts to get compromised, because there's just such a infinite options, you know, and it just becomes like, what is the shape of this? And so I would stop after 30 pages. And it, for me, I didn't get good. Like, I don't think I finished a full length screenplay until I was in grad school and somebody forced me to. And it was just a matter of, so, you know, I had gotten used to getting over that initial hump of like, what the hell is this even? And just pick a direction and go with it. But then, I don't know. I had a lot of other in and after grad school, I'd written a couple of features, but there was just something about this idea that felt like it worked better than any of those. It was something that, again, was sort of simultaneously interesting and new, but also pretty simple, and sort of spoke to something that I thought was going to be really universal. It's like we all have parts of ourselves or parts of our lives that we wish we couldn't experience or think about, and so it came pretty quickly. Like a first draft came pretty quickly after I had the initial idea. I would say I had a first draft within a couple of weeks, which is pretty fast for me. But again, it was very different from what it ended up being.
So we go from the point where you have the kernel of the idea, relatively effortless for you to put it down in a couple of weeks, because like you said, it was something that was relatively simple to execute as far as the concept is concerned, which, looking at it now, I can't imagine thinking about any of this as simple because it's such a complex story. But I think that, again, kind of answering the question, why do we think it hit so well? Number one, you can explain this in a single sentence, right? Imagine if you severed your brain and you could literally separate work from life and have total work-life balance or lack thereof. You get that in a single sentence. I can't really think of anything that's like it. But thematically, it's like, man, how much does that resonate right now? And that's interesting. But what I want to get into that I think is even more interesting, and I want to learn more about the process of I've got the script and all the challenges or stumbling blocks or rejection that may have been on your path, and maybe it was just super simple to get made. I don't know. I want to learn more about it. But I find with just about... I would imagine it wasn't, but coupled with just walking through the steps and all the potential failure and rejection along the way, what I found is a common theme with every artist and creator that I have talked to is that the reason they didn't give up is there is a deeper emotional resonance and purpose or calling behind the story that they wanted to tell versus, well, it seems like a good opportunity to get something made. Because if that's all you've got is, well, that could be my calling card or this is fun and exciting, you're going to give up. So I'd like to know first, just kind of what were all the major benchmarks to get it made and all of the failures along the way, and what kept you going through all of those failures and rejections?
Yeah, well, it was, I mean, there was definitely no shortage of failures. There were a couple times I remember having the thought like, oh, that's a bummer. I would have been happy to keep doing that for 10 more years or whatever it was, because I thought it was dead in the water. And there were, I had a manager at the time. I didn't yet have my agents, but I had a manager at a time, a guy named Ben Blake, who's awesome. And he was taking it around and working on it with me, sort of giving me feedback. And he was taking it around to different places. And I would say I had met with like at least 10 different places who were like interested and each one colored it a little bit. And like for some of them, I actually would like work with their executives or their, the producers there. And they would be like, okay, like we like this, but it's way too silly. Like, you can't have him, you can't have him get pooped out of the top of the ceiling onto the table at the beginning, which was the original opening of the show. And so I'd be like, okay, all right. Like and I would go and they asked me, those were the first people to ask me a lot of the bigger questions that I ultimately was going to have to figure out about, like, well, what is actually going on? Like, what is the actual, we may not know it until the end of the last season or even after that, but like, what is the actual purpose of this company? What's really going on? And so they got me thinking about the bigger questions. And so I created sort of a Bible for the show that I would go through with them in tandem with the pilot script, and and just sort of got into like the bigger themes and where it's all going and the characters and everything. And but yeah, there was one really big place that I was hoping was going to do it, and that fell through, and that I remember at the time kind of felt to me like, okay, this is maybe time to close the book on this project. But it did stick with me in a way that no other script has, because I kept, I think it was like, there was something very personal about it. I mean, I had just gone through like a very bad breakup at the time. I remember that I wrote it. And so this idea that, the work, putting part of yourself in an office forever, it's like, yes, that's horrible and cruel, but in a way you're also protecting a piece of yourself from the pain of life, just from the pain of the outside that we all go through and we all experience from any loss. And there's a part of you that wants to hide from that. And so it was like that scene of Mark crying in his car, was always in the script. And just this idea of like, okay, now I'm going to go to a place where I don't have to feel this. That was something that was very personal to me and an emotional experience to write because of, what I had been going through at the time. So it was like, it wasn't something I could just put down. It wasn't something I could just like stop working on. And I think that's why I persisted in continuing to tweak it with each stage, with every new person I met. And that got it to the point of being nominated for the Bloodless. And that was I honestly don't know who exactly nominated it, but my understanding is like, if there's like a production company that almost wants to do something or a script that's just being kicked around, but no, they're like, well, it's not quite for us, but it's really good, that they can nominate it for this publication. I might be getting that totally wrong. I think that's how it works. But yeah,
I'm definitely not the person to ask because that is not my world at all. But there are so many things that I want to dig into here now, and I'm wishing I had scheduled about 4 hours instead of 90 minutes. But when it comes to this process of going around from studio to studio, production company to production company, you said you had at least one pretty major rejection where you're like, it looks like maybe this isn't going to be made. Did you find that for the most part, people were actually very enthusiastic, or was it more kind of like the fictional pitch that I created where people are like, I don't ever see how we're actually going to make this. It's really cool, but what were kind of the common themes in all of the rejections?
Yeah, I mean, it was very... I think that what a lot of people wanted to do was tamp down the weirdness, for sure. So there was a lot of, and again, I'm not necessarily like, not in a way that was wrong necessarily, because we did end up tamping down some of the weirdness, in terms of like, again, the people being born out of orifices and ceilings and such. So we did, there were, but then there were others who were like, it's too, not only do we not want people being born out of ceilings, but we don't want, it's like the dialogue set, like, why are they talking a little weird? Like this could be a big thriller, like, whatever other show, this could be some, I forget what people compared it to, but there were people who were like, oh, it's like this, insert network show that kind of has like a memory element to it. And I was just always like, well, yeah, like I would have accepted that at that point because I just wanted to be working. But I was like, that's not what this is. Like, it was always something that was like weird and sad and bittersweet and like ultimately kind of warm. I was like, I want something that feels where we take you into such an alien, weird place, but then we're there for you on the other side with this sort of human story and a tone that is weird yet recognizable. And again, I assumed I was going to have to compromise that, and I was ready to cash the check. But that's why it's so fortunate that it ultimately ended up with somebody who fell in love with the weirdness, who again, it's like everything was modulated as we went along, but when it finally did get to Ben Stiller, he was the one who was the first one to be like, this is there's something so strange here, and we have to protect it because people are going to try to kill it.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, specifically the tone, because to me, the tone is one of the main characters of the entire show and the reason that it works so well. And the reason that I want to bring that up, and I also want to go back to where you had mentioned the scene of Mark crying in his car has always been there. That to me is the kernel and the heart of what this entire show is. You think it's about this high concept, sci-fi, brain science, et cetera, et cetera. Those are just pieces that kind of put the world together. But Mark sitting in his car and crying about how much he hates his job, there isn't a person on the planet that hasn't had that moment. And again, because of the timing of the pandemic and everything going on with the lack of work-life balance in our lives, that to me is what the show is and the reason that I resonated with it so much. But what I really discovered today, and I wish that I had discovered it sooner, but discovering the version of the script from 2014, what it brought up is an entirely new discussion that I wasn't even thinking about having. The story is totally different. I mean, it's the kernel of it. The tone is totally there. The style of dialogue, spot on. The characters are who they are. But just one very small example: Helly and Mark totally switched. Mark is the one on the table. I'm like, holy cow! And then, as far as the plot is concerned, by the middle of it, I'm like, I'm totally lost in how this even connects to the version that I've seen on the show, but it felt like the exact same show. And that feeling to me is what's so hard to get on paper. And that was the thing that I feel that survived from years and years ago through all the notes and all the suggestions. There was something too that was so important, and I'm glad that Ben protected it. That to me is what makes it work. The plot is great, but it's not the plot points that work. And I've had this conversation with several other guests. Does character drive plot, or does plot drive character? And it's pretty clear that for you, character is what led to plot and not the other way around.
Yeah, I think so. And it's, I mean, those things are, they're a snake vomiting its own tail out. That's a incorrect metaphor, but those things create each other in a way that it's sometimes hard to see where it all started. But yeah, I mean, definitely. I think that it's something where, you know, you start with the most sort of central question is, who are these people that we're going to be spending our time with and ostensibly caring about what happens to them? And, you know, you don't want to create a character who acts a certain way because you need to get to plot point X in episode 9, you know, but you want to create a story that's authentic for them. But at the same time, sometimes you do want to get to plot point X in episode 9, and you have to find a way for it to make sense. You have to find a way to, it's like, well, we know where we want to get Mark. So how can what are the things that we can put in his path in order to get him there? So it is, it's all creating itself in real time in a way that's weird. But yeah, but to go back, yeah, I mean, the original version of I think it's, I haven't read it in a while, but I think it's like, it's his day, it's his first day, and it leads up to, I think, him seeing the video of himself, and then it cuts back to like the outside and how he got the job, I think, right? Yeah,
and actually, like the interview, and there's a dead cat involved, and I'm just like, I don't remember any of this.
He hits Cobell's cat. I killed a cat in a pilot episode. I don't know why it didn't get bought sooner.
Well, to really dig into this one layer deeper, and this is really for those that are storytellers and specifically writers, when you're at that crossroads of, well, I can compromise my character or I can compromise my plot. Clearly, you stay true to character and you have to figure out plot that matches it. And I feel that it's a mistake to often look at it the other way around, where no, this has to be the plot. So let's compromise the character, their beliefs, their values, their motivations, because we have to get from A to B. And that's to me where most stories fall apart. But what's really interesting to me, and I didn't even realize why I gravitated so much to the show the first time, upon watching it a second time, and it's frankly the reason you and I are here today, is I wrote this really in-depth article, not about here's a review of it, but here's the deeper meaning, but also why it's really, really scary, because we're a lot closer to this being our reality than it being science fiction. But it starts with the first line, who are you? And you said the journey of the entire show is these characters asking the questions, who am I? And universally, that's kind of the question that we're all asking ourselves. Who the hell am I in real life? And I think the reason that, again, it's so universal amidst such a cool sci-fi, interesting concept, there is no more universal theme in stories than who am I?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it is centered. I mean, there's definitely a reason that's the first line of the show. And it reappears throughout the show. There's certain points where a character will say that, and that's always something to pay attention to, because although it is funny, we it happens by accident too, because just in the course of writing 9 episodes of TV, people say, "Who are you?" Like, it's not that uncommon a phrase. So there are a few times where I would like write it by accident, and someone would be like, "Oh, that's interesting. You put in a 'Who are you?" And I'd be like, "Oh yeah, I didn't mean to," but yes, I mean, it is very much the concept sort of begs the question of like, what makes us who we are? Is it something that is intrinsic to us, or are we, an amalgamation of our memories and experiences? And it just gets back to this very age-old nature versus nurture thing. It's one of the most interesting questions to ask ourselves, that we ask constantly about all the characters, is like, how much are they the same versus different people? And it's different for different characters. It's like you see Mark, and you see the same traits expressed differently in a way. And he feels like he's younger on the inside, and he feels like he's not as weighed down, and he's maybe more optimistic at first, but then in a way what we're seeing on the inside is a bunch of children growing up and sort of having an experience that propels them into kind of an adulthood. So yeah, I mean, it's always it's my favorite part of the show, I think, is asking ourselves, like, what is it that binds the two versions of Mark together? What are the traits that are essential that we can't compromise, that will always be there with him on either side, because they truly are part of who he is? Because that just leads it. And by the way, we don't have an answer. Like, we haven't figured out nature versus nurture on this show, but it's just a constant. The question is there. It's an engine that's always propelling us to the next question.
Yeah, and I think that this idea of the compromise between who am I at work, who am I outside of work, we're pretty aware of the fact that we have separation between the two. But my argument that I make in the article, and I think the argument of the show as well, is that this is kind of a reflection of the way it is in real life, and how hard it is to compartmentalize. Well, I'm a dad right now, and I'm home, and I'm present with my family, versus I'm an editor, or I'm a writer, or I'm a showrunner. The lines have blurred so much that, short of there actually being this severance procedure, of which I know that you've talked about how we're actually not that far away from it in real life. But frankly, I don't think we need the medical procedure to kind of be in a position where our real lives are a form of severance. I'm assuming that's an intentional theme of the show.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah. And that was a big part of it, was just clocking how different I am, and on one side versus the other. And even just like your values shift, it's like, you can be a excellent, loving parent, on one side. And then, you might be somebody who has to fire people and put families in dire financial straits on the other side. And how do you reconcile that? And should you, and is it something where, because we do create this boundary where it's like, well, that's something that I did when I was acting as an agent for this greater body, which is a company. That's not something, that's not something that I even really had a choice on. So I therefore don't have to carry the moral weight of that home with me. And again, it's like, we sort of have to do that, but it's something that's worth examining, because it is like, we are ultimately people. And is there a way to live in a more holistic, complete way, where you feel like you're operating under the same basic set of principles or values or whatever you call it at all times, and you're able to live consistently, as opposed to like, well, I'm going to do stuff that I don't approve of, or that I don't feel good about, but then I'm just not going to think about it. I'm going to, so that is sort of the human thing that we try to play with on the show, is like,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just, who are you, and can you become whole? Like, is it possible in this world to sort of live as a whole person?
Yeah, and I think that the one of the fallacies in us trying to figure this out in the 21st century, the big question that I think we're all asking is how can I have more work-life balance? And I think it's a good place to start, but I think we're asking the wrong question because the line is blurred so much between work and life because of technology. And I talk about the cult of productivity. And I know that that's a big theme in your show as well. But I don't think there is a version of work-life balance that we're working towards anymore. And as you said, it's more finding an alignment of consistent values. And yeah, you might change in some respect between who you are at work and who you are at home, but ultimately you maintain the same general core values. And what I've always talked about, I'm just curious on your perspective because I've been trying to figure out what do we call it instead. What I teach my students is how to develop more work-life presence. When you're at work, you're at work. When you're at home, you're at home. And it's this idea of if you're at the dinner table every night, but while you're at the dinner table, you're answering emails and Slack messages, you're not at the dinner table. Right. But if you clock the hours, you've got balance, but you don't have presence. And I don't think we can have balance anymore. And frankly, balance bores the hell out of me. So I think it's all about how do we have more work-life presence, where I would guess for you, and this is where we're going to talk about the blurring lines between the show and what your life has become. There's just that period of time where you're in it, you're making the show, you're doing what you need to do to make it the best it can be, but then you can separate yourself and be a good friend or a good partner or a good dad or whatever it might be. So I'm curious, just your thoughts as somebody that is making a show about work-life balance. Do you even think it's possible for us to achieve work-life balance given the way the world has changed so much in the last 20 years?
Yeah, it's not easy. I'll tell you that. I mean, as I'm sure everybody listening knows. Yeah, I think we forget sometimes how new all of this technology is. And how new the idea is, because you start to feel like it's been that way forever, but like how new of a notion it is that somebody can text you and they know you saw it. I mean, it's so rare that we're away from our phones. It's like they're going to assume you saw it within, and no one is obligated to respond to a text, but like you feel like you are, and I know that people, there's the spikes in anxiety and depression and all this stuff. And I think we just forget that, like, 10 or 20, whatever it is years ago, like it wasn't like that. And you could, it's that thing of going to a restaurant without your phone or leaving it at home or forgetting it. And suddenly it's like, you're noticing the space in a way that you didn't before. And I think that we do underestimate how much it's affected our psyche and how new it is and how we still don't even understand all the effects of it as much. But yeah, I agree. And like presence is something that I like really strive for in my life, because I do feel like there was like some slow thing that happened sometimes since I was a kid, where it's like, I don't feel like I'm really in the world. Like I don't know how to describe it, except like, I don't feel like I'm sensorily experiencing a room or a street or a forest in the way that I like could when I was a kid. It's something intangible that you maybe lose as you get older. And so I think part of that is the fact that we're so unable to separate from being somewhere else. It's like you always have to be thinking of the next thing, and so you can't be in the present. I'm sure I'm saying things that that you've probably gone over a lot, but it's something that I'm, as we talk through it in the show, I'm also recognizing these questions and these challenges in my own life. And it's interesting. It's interesting to try to be telling that story while simultaneously living it.
And I love that you shared your own personal example of this, because the best way that I can describe it, and you tell me if this kind of hits on what you're talking about, because I've done a deep dive for years and years understanding depression, anxiety, ADHD. I've got like the perfect cocktail of all of them, as many creatives do, right? And I got a pretty spicy little cocktail myself. What you find is that that's not an exception. That's the rule with highly creative people, especially those who become very successful. The ones that do, usually they have all those traits. They just learn how to harness them as a superpower instead of kryptonite, right? And you being so hyper obsessed with this one idea and you can't get it out of your head eventually leads to you being the showrunner of it. Whereas somebody that doesn't have some of those traits, whether good or bad, might not have landed there. But the part of this that is so interesting to me is when you shared that sometimes I feel like I'm not actually experiencing the world. And I want to give you my interpretation or my own personal experience, because I bet there are other people that have this as well. Yeah. Essentially, what it feels like to me is that I'm watching a movie. I'm sitting inside my head and I'm watching a movie and it's all happening in front of me. But at the end of the day, it's like, was I actually living the day, or did I just watch a movie? And you don't remember the smells or the feelings, and you don't feel like you're connected or engaged to it. And that's always the best way that I've been able to explain it. Is that similar to what you're talking about?
Yeah, definitely. There's just this weird like disassociation where you're like, this doesn't. Yeah, I feel like I'm getting the information. I know that I'm in this room and I know that this thing is happening, but it doesn't feel like you're alive, which is a really depressing way to put it. But I think that is how it feels.
And that's one of the things that I've spent years learning more about, is this feeling of I don't feel like I'm alive. And one of the main contributors, and it's going to be different for everybody. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not a doctor. I'm just a guy that's obsessed with learning all this stuff, and I like movies and TV, and I make it every once in a while, right? So I just want to make that clear to a new listener that this is just my friendly perspective. But a lot of that stems from imbalance of neurochemistry, lack of sleep, way too much stress, way too much cortisol, and lack of work-life balance. Whereas the more that you exercise regularly, the better you eat, the more you get consistent sleep, then you wake up and you actually feel alive and engaged with the world, and you can be your creative best.
Yes.
And the reason that I say all of this is now I want to get more into the story of the blurring between work-life balance and Severance, and work-life balance and you trying to make Severance. So here's the next part of the story that's so intriguing to me, kind of going back to this hypothetical vision in my head of how this went. You get it in front of Ben Stiller. Ben Stiller says, "This is genius. I want to direct. I want to executive produce. Leave the tone. This is amazing. We're going to make this." You go to the studio with this package and they say, "Oh, who's going to run it?" Let me tell you all about Dan Erickson. Let's go to his IMDb pro page, shall we? So if we scan backwards, he got a special thanks credit on one episode of a show versus Man versus Animal. Okay. No, that's it. He's going to be our showrunner of this Apple TV show. How did this happen?
Well, what's funny is that's actually IMDb isn't quite sure on me yet. That Man versus Animal is another Dan Erickson. That is not me.
That makes the story even funnier. So there was literally nothing to see on IMDb, and here you are running this immensely complicated show. And the reason it's so important to talk about this is, as you know from your end of things as a writer now turned producer showrunner, there is a huge shortage of experienced writer-producers becoming showrunners, and this is becoming a big issue for the Writers Guild. So I'm curious, what was the conversation where they decided, yes, not only do we love Dan Erickson as the writer, but he's going to run the show?
Well, I should say that showrunner in the case of our show is a pretty relative term that has been somewhat shared amongst a couple of different people over time. At that time, they were they were willing to take a risk on me, which was very cool and very surprising. I wasn't sure. I was like, will I even be in the writer's room, or will I like hand off the idea to like more capable minds or more experienced minds? Because yeah, I mean, it's true. I had done basically nothing at that point. But they did. They were like, we want you in the room. We want you sort of guiding the process, but we are going to pair you with somebody else. So they paired me with a guy at the time who was named Chris Black, and it was really, really, really smart, experienced, interesting guy who also like got the tone of the show really well. He had worked on some other stuff that was a little bit in that world of being like somewhat, genre-y and like weird and scary, but like funny in a way. And so he and I worked on it together, but also with Ben. I mean, Ben was very, especially once he was done with his work on Escape of Dannemora, he was very close, was working very closely with us. And crafting it from the get-go. But I did, yeah, I basically ran the room in tandem with Chris. And then, once it moved into production, I was largely running it in tandem with a guy named Mark Friedman. And so at every stage of it, there was somebody there with me to sort of make sure that I, didn't steer it completely off the rails. And in a lot of cases to inject ideas that made it work where it wouldn't have worked otherwise. So I was surprised to have the confidence of Apple, but I was also given a lot of help.
Yeah, and that's a really, really smart way, I think, to approach it. Years ago, I worked on a show called Burn Notice, and at the time, and I wasn't on it season 1. I came in season 4 through the end of it, season 7. So I wasn't there at the very beginning, but the creator of that show became the showrunner, Matt Nix. But the first season, they did the same thing, where they paired him with kind of a co-showrunner, just so we could understand the day-to-day of, there's a big difference between I'm a writer and now I'm a writer, and I'm the CEO of a company managing an entire team and being a leader. That's a pretty massive shift. And after season 1, he totally took the reins, and I think he did a brilliant job. But I know that that's a fairly common arrangement. And I think that for some people, they could see that as, well, that's a point of weakness, or I'm inexperienced, or people don't believe in me. But you strike me as somebody that really embraced it as a value and strengthening you, as opposed to, well, there must be something wrong with me if I need this help.
Yeah, no, totally. I was grateful for it. I didn't want to be up there without a net, as certainly. And I will say, I don't really want to be CEO, to be honest with you. And it's such an interesting thing that this role of showrunner, I think the reason that it can be hard to fill is it is such a weird confluence of qualities and skill sets, where you don't have a ton of people who are really good at creating and crafting a concept and turning that into a pilot, a really interesting bonkers pilot, and people who are really good at running a production. Like that Venn diagram barely touches. And so when you do find somebody who's really good at both of those things, you've sort of found a unicorn. And so, that was why I was so grateful, initially when they paired me with Chris, because it was like, he's got this mind where he can do both. He can sort of pivot between both worlds. But it's not something that I don't think I'm speaking out of school here, but I've never really been the showrunner in terms of production and making liaising with all the different departments and the line producer and the schedules to put it all together and make it work. Like, I've never really stepped into that role, and I don't know that I will, because it is it's just something that is such a different skill set, and we'll see what happens over the years. But for the most part, my whole thing is story, and is just I want to make this work, and then I want to do what I can to liaise with all the other creatives and make sure that we're telling this telling the story the way we want to. But yeah, it's not. It is just a strange, showrunner is such a weird, specific role that, as we conceive of it, so few people can do, or have been proven to do effectively anyway.
One of the things that impresses me about this show, but impresses me about shows like Breaking Bad and others that are really kind of in the canon of great shows, which again, we still need to see multiple seasons to make sure you're in that conversation, but I have a pretty high level of confidence it probably will be. But what I'm really impressed by is consistency. When you can look at any episode of a show over 3 seasons or 5 or 8, and it feels like the same show, and it's really hard to do that, because there are some amazing shows that have 1 or 2 unbelievable seasons, and then they completely tank. Dexter, sorry, something in my throat, right?
Oh, that was weird.
Yeah, I don't know what that was. But the point being that it's almost impossible to have that consistency over years and years. And my theory, my hypothesis is that the two main components, and there's probably more than this, but number one is you have to be willing to know what you don't know and surround yourself with people that are really good at filling the gaps that you can't, which I feel like for you, not wanting to be the CEO, not wanting to deal with production, you're surrounded by a lot of the right people, including craftspeople, cinematographers, editors, composers. Like, I feel like every single beat of all the different departments is just running on all cylinders. And there has to be a willingness to leave your ego at the door and say, they're better at this stuff than I am. But then the problem is, if you don't have your own consistent vision and you can't communicate it, then all of a sudden you get a show done by committee where every individual department head thinks they know best, but you can steer them and say, hey, that's great. That's not my vision.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so, I mean, it's balance, not to go back to a buzzword, but it is sort of because good advice can become bad advice if the wrong person hears it, or you hear it at the wrong time. And someone, I've so many people have said, like, you have to stick to your vision. Like, this is your show. You have to fight for it. You have to defend it. And if you're right about something, you have to fight for it, because other people will try to water it down, which is great advice. Like, but another piece of great advice is you have to listen to those around you, and you won't always be right. And you will meet people, you will think you're right in the moment. And then later you'll look back and be like, oh my God, they had the right impulse and I wasn't listening. Like, that's also a thing that happens. And so those are both pieces of advice that I've gotten at different times. And it's just a matter of like, where is, like you said, how do you do both? Like, how do you decide what matters? How do you decide which of your ideas are worth fighting for, and which ones, you could be wrong on? And that's why it's hard, I think, is there is no easy answer. Like, I wish I could be like, I found the line, but I still, it's still something I deal with. Like, constantly I'm disagreeing with Ben on stuff, or one of the other writers. It happens all the time. And it's always, it happened in season 1, it happens in season 2. And, both of us have our different math we have to do in our head of like, okay, is this worth continuing to fight for? Or is this other guy maybe onto something? And yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the way that I've broken it down, and I work on a very different level where I'm working in editorial, and so many decisions are already made by the time the dailies get in front of me. But if there are ideas that I want to convey, or I feel a scene isn't working or a sequence isn't working, whatever it might be, the question for me is always, do I want to win the battle or do I want to win the war? And when I'm breaking that down, it's a matter of, all right, so this one training montage, let's say we're talking about Cobra Kai. I'm cutting this training montage and it absolutely has to be this song. And they're like, no, we don't like that song. Well, in the grand scheme of the entire season, I feel like there's a credit or a quota of how many times you can really die on a hill versus, all right, at the end of the day, this is your vision and it's not mine, so we'll go in that direction. But there's always kind of this, well, maybe next time I can kind of interject my thoughts into it. But the buck stops with you. I realize there's Apple and there's executives, but it's different for you where I can pass it along and be like, all right, well, this is your decision and your show. So even if I don't agree with it, you're going to take the fall if it doesn't work. You're going to get all the accolades if it does. But it ends with you. You're the guy. This came out of your mind. So is it just based on intuition? Are you calculating it? Because this is a really tough place to live, especially as a new showrunner and writer with your first show. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately all you have is your own intuition. There's never going to be a time where, you can't pull the audience and there's never going to be a moment where suddenly it's like every single person would tell you, this is right, so this is objectively the right thing to do. It's always just, you got to figure it out. And again, I always just try to go back to, this is actually something, I have a really good therapist who I talk to a lot about work. And she's like, whenever you can, she's like, I know this is hard, but like, whenever you can, try to just get back to the point of you're writing this for yourself. It's like, if I was just writing this for myself and I wasn't, I didn't have to turn it in 2 days and was worried about, what XYZ person is going to think, what would you write? Like what's fun, and sometimes I can get back to that headspace and sometimes I can't. But when I can, it almost always works. It's like I always end up with something that it might not be what Apple or whoever like was asking for exactly, but I'll find something and I'll be like, in the journey of going through these notes, I found this thing and I think it's interesting and I think we should go for it. And usually when I find something that way, it works and it gets passed. But
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, but it is interesting because the buck does stop with me, but also there are also, rightfully safeguards, and there are people around me who I have to get it past to, who it's like, I need to make sure that these people think this is ready. And so that's the challenge, is to not get in a headspace of trying to like think like them. It's like, just think like you. And if you do it right, then they'll like it.
And I think that comes back full circle to what you said at the beginning, which is, I was writing this for 5 guys that were going to go on the internet and say, oh my God, did you hear this show? It's awesome. You're not trying to write it for everybody. That's why I think that it's working, is it's so unique. And it's so, there, I'm sure plenty of people that would watch 1 or 2 episodes and are like, what is this? This is so not for me. But as a creator, as an artist, you just have to be willing to accept that my work will attract the right people and it will totally repel all the wrong people. I have to be okay with that. You try to make it for everybody, well, it's probably going to end up on CBS.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is like it was a case of sort of getting rewarded for sticking to the vision. And again, I have to give Ben a lot of credit for that, because he's obviously a pretty big heavyweight in the industry, and he could have very easily spent the rest of his life being one of the biggest comedy stars in the world, and been very successful at that. But he decided that he wanted to tell interesting stories, and that he was going to use the clout he's built up in the industry to protect interesting stories. And he was going to be the one who could tell the network or the distributor, whomever, just like, sorry, this is how we're doing it, And I will say, like, Apple and Fifth Season have always been really good at that. Like, in my experience, have always been really good at letting us do that. But I think a big part of it is that, you have the weight of being Ben Stiller, and he was willing to use that capital to defend the weirdness of this story. And I think that's the biggest X factor as to how we were able to get this made in the same, without killing it, without killing what made it unique.
Where I want to go next is something that we've alluded to a couple of times, and to me kind of ends up becoming the best part, I hope, of this conversation, is you become the showrunner of this show, and all of a sudden the lines start to blur between the show and you making the show. So talk to me about some of the brand new work-life balance challenges or otherwise that you've experienced now being immersed in this world literally 24/7.
Yeah. It's like, what's the Nightmare on Elm Street movie where like Freddy comes for the actors? Like he breaks out of the movie and he comes for the like cast and crew of Nightmare on Elm Street. Like, it gets really meta, I remember, at some point in the franchise. But is it Wes Craven's New Nightmare? I don't know. Anyway,
it's one of them. I don't know exactly which one, but yeah, I definitely get the concept.
There's one where it gets meta. But that's what happened to me. Like, work-life balance, the problems broke out of the script and they came to eat me alive. Because it is like, and I always hesitate to sort of, certainly don't want to sound like I'm griping, but like it completely consumed like once this was happening and the weight of that sort of landed on me, like, oh my God, I am getting an opportunity here that is a miracle and that I never thought I'd get. And I have to give this everything. This is it. What if not this am I ever going to pour my whole self into, because this is the story I wanted to tell and I'm getting a chance to tell it on this huge level. And I have all these incredibly gifted people who are also like pouring everything they have into it. That's the other thing, is you feel a sense of responsibility because of the hard work everybody else is doing. And you're like, well, I'm at the top of this. If I'm not willing to do the same thing, what does that say? And so I did, I sort of, I sort of stopped doing a lot of the stuff I used to do. Like I basically didn't date for like a couple of years. And I had I was lucky enough to have a really good core group of friends, here in LA that I would see and that I would sort of get out. But it was like, I haven't been on a hike in so long. I've recently started to try to get back into, healthy diet and exercise, but it was like, when the show happened, I totally regressed in terms of like, I used to cook for myself fairly regularly. And I've cooked for myself maybe like 3 or 4 times in the last couple of years, because it is like, you get so in your head about it. And it's like, well, I can't go down to the grocery store and like spend time squeezing avocados. Like there's work to be done. And this is, I have to keep my miracle alive, because it's such a gift that it came and you almost feel like the idea of living a normal life, you start to feel like is ungrateful or something. And so, and there was just mounting pressure, and which didn't get better when the show became a success. I mean, if anything, it was the contrary, where it was like, once season 2 hit and season 1 hit and people actually started to respond to it. And it was like, okay, now we have a responsibility, not just to these people working hard for us, but to these however many, many people who watch and love the show and have invested their time. And it does, like, the things you say those are the little anxiety voices in my head that are just like, well, if it's not as good as season 1, people are going to be really like, they're going to say that, they're going to be upset, and they're going to feel let down. And it's all this stuff that builds up and builds up. And I've only recently had to really actively try to take control over that and just be like, okay, I'm not going to be any good to anybody if I drop dead. So like, how do I get back to a point where I'm doing this show and I'm putting in enough time and effort and energy to make it work, but I am not letting it eat me. And I'm still, and again, like sometimes I can just be present in a room and feel my weight on a chair and not be thinking about the deadline that I have, a day from now. And so it's, I'm still figuring it out. I'm still not great at it, but it's, it's a vague mix of meditation and just setting time boundaries where it is like, okay, like God damn it, I'm going on a date tonight and I'm not going to look at my phone, or I'm just watching a movie tonight and I'm not going to look at my phone. And trying to train your brain to not be, catastrophizing about the thing and remembering that stress isn't helping you. Like if you sit for 2 hours stressed out and do nothing, it's the same as sitting at peace and getting nothing done. You get the same amount done, but you're working on your health. So yeah, I feel like it's if I'm rambling, it's because I'm in the middle of figuring it out. But it's something that I'm trying to be very conscious of, especially now that it feels like this show may go for some time. And it's like you have to find a way that's tenable to do it and still exist.
Well, you've found the sweet spot, my friend, because this is literally what I specialize in. And this is the problem that I help people solve all day, every day. It used to be solving my own problem, working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. Then it became a little bit of a side hustle. Let me see if I can help some of my editor friends through this. And now it's become this entire movement where I firmly believe that you can live a more balanced, productive, fulfilling life and have a creative career, but it has to be sustainable. Because like you said, you make season 1 and then you drop dead. What was the point, right? But the way that the industry is constructed and the expectations that are put upon us with deadlines and budgets and turnaround, right? We're losing our relationships. We're losing our health. We're losing our literal sanity for some people. And I have colleagues that have literally dropped dead at their desks because of the hours. There isn't a direct causation. The correlation is pretty clear. So that's the whole reason that I do what I do, because I know how difficult this is for everybody. So essentially what I want to do is I want to turn this around a little bit. And instead of it being, tell us about all the problems that you solved, I want to know one that you haven't solved yet, specifically related to how do I maintain both a consistent show over multiple seasons, but do it while maintaining who I am as a person, maintaining my health, because you're not going to write great scripts if your health is in a horrible place. So
Right.
what's kind of the conundrum for you right now where you're like, man, how do I fit this in or make this happen or create this habit? What is it that you're struggling with right now that is the separation of work and life for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the easiest thing to point to is exercise. I mean, it is because it's like, I think that there's I have like a on my notes app, I have like a little like week schedule. It's like, okay, this day it's meditation and jogging, and this day it's meditation and weights, or blah blah blah. And I was doing that for about 4 days, and then I stopped, and it is just because it's like it's not about it. It's about waking up and being like, okay, yeah, I could jog, but then I will have lost an hour, or I'll have lost, half an hour, or whatever, however long it takes to find my shorts and change into them and everything, and it's so yeah, I that's something I've not been able to crack yet in terms of doing consistently.
Cool. You mind if we dig into this a little bit deeper?
Yeah, okay. Why not?
Awesome. I'm curious, what did your exercise habit look like before you were making Severance?
It was also not the best, if I'm being totally honest with you. It's never been but yeah, like I had a gym membership. I would go probably 3 times a week, and I would spend maybe an hour there. And it was like, yeah, a mix of like running on a treadmill and then doing some weight stuff. And yeah, it worked. It worked okay.
Aside from it working okay, did you actually enjoy it? Did you look forward to it? Or was it just a thing you had to do because you were supposed to?
Yeah, no, I've never really enjoyed it, if I'm being totally honest.
Yeah, you couldn't catch me dead going to the gym because it's just so boring and banal. And if I have to do it rather than I get to do it, I'm never going to do it. Is there anything that you've done previously, activities, whether you were a kid, right out of college, in college, something physical that you actually enjoyed, that was fun, that you were drawn to?
Yeah, I mean, climbing, I think, I wonder sometimes. I went to a climbing gym like once a couple of years ago, and like had a really good time with some friends. But yeah, that was something I used to do as a kid, more like, I was a camp counselor, and I would do the climbing wall and stuff, and that was always fun. Yeah, I mean, biking, maybe, like that's something that but I feel like I don't know. I'm like intimidated by it, because I'm like, well, where do you even bike around my neighborhood? Like I'd have to figure out. I feel like I don't even know how to bike. The other bicyclists will laugh at me.
Mm-hmm. So now we've got some imposter syndrome, right? Which factors into whether you're a creative or otherwise. For you, somebody that considers themselves one who exercises their cycles, I'm going to look like a moron. I'm going to show up with the wrong kind of bike and the wrong tires for the trail, and they've all got their nice helmets and all their sponsored stuff, and I'm here in my, my gray shirt and my shorts. Like I'm going to look like a moron, right? So that happens to all of us, and if we break it down into small component parts, we can just figure out how to take one step at a time. No different than if you were going to write a new spec script, for example. You start with the kernel of an idea and you go from there. So if we're going to look at climbing versus cycling, which of those is a skill that actually excites you to get better at?
Probably climbing.
Because climbing's kind of fun. It's like problem solving, and it's different, and it's the kind of thing where you can actually, rather than it being I got to put in the miles, there's actually some variation.
Yeah.
Are you in where do you live? Like, what's your general neighborhood? I don't need to publicize your address, but are you in LA?
Yeah, I'm in LA. I'm in LA. I'm in like Los Feliz, Silver Lake area.
All right. So then I don't know exactly where it is, but I know that there's a climbing gym relatively close to you. Mm-hmm. In the past, when you've done, whether it was climbing or cycling or going to the gym, did you have people that were expecting you to be there?
No, I don't think I've ever had that.
Is that something that would help you? Not everybody needs it, but I feel like for most people, having that accountability in that group and somebody's waiting for you to show up, that's a pretty determining factor about whether or not you go 4 days or you go 4 months. Yeah.
I think it would help. It also scares the crap out of me.
See, now we're getting into the sweet spot, because now it's getting uncomfortable.
It's getting real.
So what's causing you to break a sweat?
Just like in general in life.
No, I mean, as
Like
far
what
as
do I?
this idea of like going to a climbing gym, people are expecting me to be there. Is it like a good discomfort or like no, this definitely is not for me?
No, I mean it's probably a good discomfort. I mean it's this idea of like if I like signing up for a trainer or something is something I've always been like because then what if I something comes up right? It's one more person who's going to have an expectation of me in an already busy life. I guess is
because at the end of the day, that's what it is for you all day, every day. There's a DP, there's an editor, there's a studio executive, there's a co-showrunner, there's Ben Stiller. Everybody's has some expectation. So for you, it just feels like that would be one other person that I now have to meet their expectation.
yeah. Yeah, which is not. I mean, it's not. I'm not saying my brain is right when it thinks that, but that is sort of what my. It's like, oh, I can't sign up for a class, then I'll have to go to a class.
What if you didn't sign up for a class or you didn't schedule with a trainer? You just showed up
Well, I mean,
just
that's
once.
what I. Yeah, just yeah. It would probably be fun.
So if you were to establish the habit of climbing or cycling or some combination of the both, it wasn't even something that you did like 5, 6, 7 days a week, but let's just, like you said, you haven't gone hiking in forever. Let's say that you go 1 day a week. What effect does that have on your work, on your creativity, on your mood, relationships? What's kind of the domino effect?
Well, I think it's a positive effect. I think it's you again, you get out of the cycle of where you're always working and you start to feel, it's like you're filling your tank a little bit too. I mean, it's like you have to have experiences to write about things and you're getting out and you're living life. And so I think it can only be good.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, I would agree because that's what I advocate for all the time. The other part that I'm curious about, and I think this is much more common, whether you're at the level that you are or even significantly lower on the totem pole, is you were talking about how you have all these expectations that you want to meet and you're working 24/7 to meet all of them. How much of those do you think are coming from you inside versus whether it's an executive or somebody else on the outside saying, we need you to focus on this 24/7 and make this happen? I think it's kind of a blend of both. But from your perspective, in your world, your experience doing now your first 2 seasons of a show, how much of it is it's very clear this is the external expectation versus I could actually go on a date or I could go climbing or whatever, but I put it upon myself to always be available.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's some of each. I won't say that it's like it's certainly not all in my head, but there definitely this sense that like it has to always be on your mind is somewhat, at least somewhat self-imposed. I had another person who came in and was helping to run the season 2 room with me, a guy named Sam Catlin, like said at one point he had done multiple seasons of a different show, and he was like, it wasn't until after the second season that I realized I was working harder than I had to, and I was doing these things. And at the time that he said that, I remember sort of being like, no, that's not. It's like there's no way, like, everything we're doing is necessary. Like there's, and it's not self-imposed. It's not something you can just choose to walk away from. But I feel like I've slowly been coming to understand what he means in a way where it's like, yeah, but there are simpler ways to get there. And you're not supposed to be thinking about it all the time. Like you have to find a way, like you will be better and you'll get more done if you find a way to like, don't think about every decision you're going to have to make in the next 5 days. Just think about it when it comes and then move on to the next thing. And then when you're done for the day, be done for the day. So it's a long answer, but I think to an extent, it's definitely self-imposed.
And the reason that I bring that up is in working with so many people in so many different crafts, that it's often about the skill of setting boundaries. And it's hard to set boundaries until you actually, going back to what we mentioned earlier, have a very clear vision. So I wanted to create this hypothetical example because I think it's so analogous to what so many people deal with in this industry. So hypothetically, you're thinking, you know what? I think I want to build a habit of going climbing. I'm not going to be doing it all day, every day. I'm not going to be bouldering in the mountains, but maybe I want to establish the habit of climbing, let's say once or twice a week. Where do you reach the boundary or the non-negotiable of it's going to be at the expense of these things on the show versus I feel like I should be working, but at the end of the day, I'm kind of creating this false expectation. How would you balance those two where the climbing is good for me and it's a boundary versus it's now compromising what I want to do with the show and my vision?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, that's something I grapple with for sure. I think that ideally you would hope that the activities would actually ultimately benefit the work and that you're, by taking care of yourself and getting in a good rhythm, you are setting yourself up for more success and that you're going to be more productive during those hours when you are working.
So here's the flip side of it. Having gone through all of this and being in your mind 24/7 in the show, there's got to be some value to that, given that you're living a lot of the themes that you're talking about. So where does, even though it might not be best for your health or your cholesterol or whatever short term, you're doing a lot of good research to really understand and crawl into the mind of your characters, I would presume.
Yeah. It's like method acting, but for writing.
I love it. That's a great way to put it. It's basically your method writing, whether you like it or not. So.
Yeah.
So the last thing that I wanted to go into very, very briefly, just because I know that this idea of the pipeline from staff writer to co-EP to EP to showrunner, that line has really been blurred in the industry because of streaming and the proliferation of content. And I know this is a big topic of potential conversation for what hopefully is not going to be a strike, but I know that there's a lot of conversations around this. So if I were a writer that was on the more non-traditional path, and I'm about to potentially sell a show where I may end up in a position similar to you, granted you haven't been doing it for 20 years, but you've now been through the ringer. What are some of the pieces of advice you would give me and things that I don't know that you now know?
It's hard to not just say everything, because I mean, for me, it truly was. And I think I have an unusual trajectory here where I really did go from like 0 to 100. Again, I had never been in a writer's room, so I wasn't sure, the degree to which I should try to run the conversation. It's like, should I come in and already have some ideas fleshed out and let people sort of, pitch on that? Or it's like, are people going to be offended if I do that? Like, are the other writers going to think that, do they want to just generate it conversationally? And I think what I was lucky to learn is that a lot of it can be what you make it. Like, it's not like you may be told that's like, this is how a writer's room works, but it's like, I was lucky enough to be in a position where it was like, I was encouraged to like figure out what works for you and then just do that. And we will support you in that. And so for me, like in that season 1 room, like there was a lot of time. It's like, I would, we would meet for a couple hours and then I'd say like, I need some time in my office. I just need to sit and think for a while. And I learned at a certain point, like people aren't going to be mad if I ask that. Like I can, because I'm the one who has to get this done, ultimately, I can tell people what is best for me in terms of process. So yeah, not being too afraid to mess up. I mean, that's, I guess, is what it comes down to. Like, knowing that the people around you are not waiting for you to screw up. They're just there to help, and they are on your team and on your side. And it's not like that nightmare where you're taking a test and don't know any of the answers. It's like you have the people around you and they have the answers, and it's okay to ask them, and it's okay to tell them what you need and let them use their expertise to help you get there.
Failure is a core component in a mindset that I teach all the time, where I believe failure is the fastest path to success versus we have to avoid failure at all costs and we need to portray success at all times. Goes back to this idea of one of the reasons you've been able to maintain a consistent vision. You're okay if other people around you have the best ideas and have answers to the questions that you don't. I think that's such a core part of being a leader, being a creator, and all of the other things that we've talked about. So one last thing to wrap it up. Talked about giving advice to a potential writer, showrunner that's going to be in a similar position as you. One last person I want to give advice to. It's an exercise I don't do with all of my guests, but I'm curious what your answer might be. You're going to become a time traveler, and we're going to time travel back to whatever the moment was you were the most convinced this was never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing what you know now, you're going to sit down and you're going to give yourself a little chat. What are you going to give yourself as far as some advice?
Okay. So I'm speaking now to Dan, circa the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Dan, listen, I know you've spent the last 3 years getting this thing ready. And at every stage you keep thinking, oh, something's going to fall through and it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And then you had finally gotten to the point where it's like, oh my God, this is actually going to happen. I know you just had a table read. Patricia Arquette was there. John Turturro was there. It was huge. It was this big thing. And then all of a sudden you got news that we were shutting down because of this pandemic and we have to shut down and we don't know when we're coming back. Now, I know that you think that the universe is screwing with you right now and that it's like, oh my God, it was finally about to happen. And then the only thing that could have possibly stopped it happened. But the universe is not against you. The COVID pandemic, in fact, is not about you. It's something that everybody has to deal with. And in fact, this is just one more hurdle and it's actually going to be good. Not on any level, the COVID is good is what I'm saying. But in terms of the show, you are going to now actually get much more time to write the season and hone it. And you're going to use that time to make it the best it can possibly be. And it's still going to happen and it's going to be really good. And you're going to meet Michael Keaton at an awards show and it's going to be really cool. And he's going to say he likes the show. So this looks like this looks like a cosmic joke that's going to kill your show, but it's not. It's going to make you stronger. You're going to be okay.
That is by far the best answer I have ever gotten to that question. Oh my God, that was so good. The level of detail, like the performance, the vision. Usually people get some really good advice and then sometimes they emotionally go there. The fact that you acted it out and pictured yourself in this scenario with a level of detail, now I understand why you are the storyteller that you are, because that was great.
Can I also say, stop trimming your own beard. Go to a barber and have them trim your beard because they know how to do it and you don't know how to do it, and you look ridiculous. That's the last thing.
What a great way to cap it. I can see so much of your personality in the show now. It's all come together and made so much more sense to me. I could probably go for at least another 3-4 hours. However, I am going to be respectful of your time. And I just want to close by saying, in my mind, this episode and this conversation has been months and months and months and months in the making. It was totally worth the wait, and you not only met, but exceeded my expectations. I can't thank you enough for being here. And for anybody that's out there that wants to learn more about you beyond Severance, that might want to connect with you, can they do that? And if so, how?
They can look me up on the Instagram. I'm at InstaDan360. Wait, let me make sure I get it right. InstaDan360. That's me. That's probably the best way.
Well, again, I can't thank you enough. This has meant the world to me, and really appreciate you taking the time to share your experience, your expertise, and just help us all better understand how to manage this crazy journey that we call life. So thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you so much. This is great.